Hello, Monetization Nation. I'm Nathan William, your host. Today is a faith episode, and I want to tell you a story about a mistake that I've made recently. About a week ago, there was an event held in Fort Worth, or a series of events held in Fort Worth. There were Christmas parties for the Gladney Center for Adoption, and I do a lot of work for the Gladney Center for Adoption. I sold my Adoption.com business to them, and the Gladney Center for Adoption, I believe, is the premier adoption organization in America, and I love Gladney. And so Gladney had invited me to a couple of different Christmas parties and some events, and I still run the Adoption.com team there, and I had invited many members of the Adoption.com team to come, and we're a remote team, and so this was going to be our chance to be together and do some events together. We were going to go to Six Flags together and the Fort Worth Zoo together. And about a month to 3 weeks or so, I don't remember the exact date, before the event, we were going to buy tickets. We were making plans for this event, and it did not feel right. Have you ever had that spiritual impression that you should not do something? Well, I had one of those about this trip. I had a spiritual impression that I should not go on this trip. And so I felt that feeling so strong that I even contacted the HR manager of Adoption.com, who was going to buy the plane tickets, and told her not to buy my plane ticket. And after about a week of thinking about it, I became worried about what the people in Fort Worth were going to think, the Gladney team, if I didn't show up to these Christmas parties that they so graciously invited me to, and what was going to happen if I wasn't there for the events for my Adoption.com team. And I started assuming why I was feeling those feelings, and I started thinking of these logical reasons why it still would be okay for me to go. And ultimately, I'm ashamed to admit this, I bought the tickets and I went to Fort Worth for the Christmas parties. And the Christmas parties were wonderful, and it was so good to work with that Gladney team. It was so good to be there and do those events with my Adoption.com team. I really enjoyed it. But we're 2 years into COVID now, and I have not gotten COVID, or had not gotten COVID that I knew of. And on that trip, I got COVID. I came back on a Saturday and wasn't feeling well. On Sunday, I took a COVID test, and it came back negative. And I quarantined upstairs. My wife is in pretty poor health, and I didn't want to get her sick. And my symptoms kept getting worse for a couple of days. And on Tuesday, they were bad enough. I went into an urgent care, and I assumed I had bronchitis. In fact, I don't always record these episodes in sequential order. In 2 of the most recent episodes I recorded, I told you that I thought I had bronchitis. But after I recorded those episodes, I went into the urgent care and told the doctor my symptoms, and he gave me a test, and it was a COVID test, and I tested positive on that Tuesday. And so I have been quarantined upstairs in my house for about a week now. And some people have these quarantines that they go through for COVID where they're asymptomatic and they just have to spend 10 days away from other people so they don't get anybody sick. That is not the kind of quarantine I have been having. I've been having a lot of symptoms. This COVID experience has kind of kicked my butt a little bit. And I did get the vaccine, and I am very grateful that this COVID experience has been as mild as it has. I know a lot of people have had it much worse than me. My father-in-law passed away less than a month ago from COVID, and I know we've lost a lot of really good people because of it, and I'm very grateful I'm not there. But this hasn't been easy for me. And a day or two after I tested positive for COVID, as I was in my quarantine and was was thinking about it, I made the connection that God had given me a prompting. God had told me to not go to Fort Worth. And I assumed I knew why he was telling me not to go to Fort Worth. And I rationalized it away, and I used logic and made a decision, and I went anyway. And I think the reason why he was telling me not to go to Fort Worth had nothing to do with the reasons I had assumed. And I disobeyed a prompting, and I got COVID. After 2 years of not getting COVID through this pandemic, I had a chance. I was told where not to go. I went there anyway in disobedience, and I am now dealing with the consequences of it with COVID. And if I had obeyed those promptings, I would not have COVID right now. So a few nights ago, when I came to that realization in my quarantine, I called my wife, and I asked her, I said, do you remember when I told you that it didn't feel right to go on this trip? And I told our HR person to not buy the ticket for me. And then I ultimately decided to go. And she remembered it. And I said, I feel so stupid because I was disobedient, and now I'm dealing with the consequence of that. And I committed to her and committed to myself that when I receive a prompting and I know what I'm supposed to do, I will follow it. It reminds me of the story of Jonah and how he received the inspiration that he needed to go teach the people in Nineveh. And he didn't follow that prompting, and he had to deal with the consequences of it there in the belly of the whale. It also reminds me of the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who didn't make the mistake that I made. They were told that they had to do some things that they knew were wrong, and they refused to do it. And the consequences of not doing those things is they would be cast into a fiery furnace and burned alive. And they responded in Daniel 3:17 and 18, quote, "If it be so, if you cast us into the furnace, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hands. But if not, we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up," unquote. So what they basically were saying is, we're going to do what God has told us is the right thing to do. When God speaks, we will follow. And we trust that God will deliver us. And I love how it says here, but if not, we're still going to do it. Even if God wouldn't have delivered them from that fiery furnace, they were still committed to follow God. And I need to have that kind of resolve inside of me. When I know I'm supposed to do something or not supposed to do something, I need to not worry about what other people are going to think about me, and I need to do it anyway. And let the chips fall however they are. Trust that God will take care of me, but if not, I'm still going to follow him. So that's my key takeaway for us entrepreneurs today. Let's commit right now that when we know what God wants us to do, we are going to follow it. And let's trust that God will take care of us and not worry about what other people are going to think about us. But if not, it's okay. We still choose to follow him. Thank you for joining me for this episode, and I wish you success in all of your endeavors.